going on? This is Paul Revelia here from ProPhysique.com. Today I'm going to do my first ever question and answer video log based on some questions that I posted on my Instagram and my Facebook page. And these are just my opinions and my advice, and if you don't like it, then take a hike. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. What do you think separates the great athletes from the average ones? So, great athletes have two things: the work ethic and talent. Average ones have one or the other. So if you're talking about sports or if you're talking about bodybuilding, there are some, and you're going to go to a bodybuilding show and you're going to see some guys that walk out on stage with elite genetics, tiny waists, wide shoulders, flared quads, but they just don't quite bring the conditioning, they don't work on their posing enough, they're not focused on their diet, and a lot of that stems from the fact that it's easy to them. They can get on stage at half-ass and still beat most people. You'll have the other side of the coin. The guy with below average genetics, wide hips, narrow shoulders, not real big full muscle bellies, not whatever you're talking about. If you're talking about bodybuilding, maybe they don't have great quad sweep. They don't have great muscle insertions throughout their body. But they track their diet meticulously. They've trained for years. They come in stage absolutely peeled. Now those guys may never win a world championship, but they are going to beat the talented guys that don't put in the work. But they're both roughly average competitors. They're never going to be Philip Ricardo, they're never going to be Brian Whitaker, they're never going to be Doug Miller. Now the difference is, when you talk about the guys that I just mentioned, you're taking elite genetics and then you're taking the work ethic and you're putting them together. And when you do that, there's not a whole lot that you can do to beat that person if you don't have the talent. The person I talked about earlier who has talent but isn't putting in the work, if they hit that stride and decide to get motivated, they're going to wipe the floor with the person who doesn't have talent but works his butt off. So in my opinion, that's the difference. And if you're talking about sports, it's the same thing. If you're talking about somebody like Michael Jordan worked his tail off. He was relentless, but he also happened to be 6'6", have the vertical to jump out of the gym, had hands the size of baby elephants, so these are some intangibles that, while other athletes may work just as hard as Michael Jordan, they're just not going to have the potential that he had on the field. Same thing goes with all sports. So I'm sure there are some amazing players in the NBA and Major League Baseball that just don't have the genetic makeup to be elite, but they've really gotten the most they can out of themselves, but they are still considered average. Any benefit to a MiniCut or brief period of lowering calories, carbs during an off-season? Caloric surplus phase as meant to be reduced fat gain. I've heard it mentioned by many, never thought it to make much sense, thanks. So let's address this by talking about, why are we in a surplus? What is our goal? So if we're in a surplus or we are working on building muscle, the only reason I would suggest doing a MiniCut is if the psychology of the athlete is no longer benefiting from that goal. If we've reached a point where the person isn't happy, they've kind of lost motivation, they're just going through the motions in the gym, then I'm all for doing a brief period of fat loss to get the person back to where they see themselves. Now, is there a benefit to doing 4 weeks in a deficit, then 4 weeks in a surplus? My good friend Lane Norton used to do a video on this years ago. He no longer subscribes to this. I think strictly it's to benefit the psychology of the athlete. I think if your goal is to put on muscle and build your metabolism, then that should be the goal. 4-week MiniCut is basically just going to allow you to drop a little bit of body fat, change your body composition. If that's going to benefit you mentally, if that's going to get you motivated and excited to go in the gym and push yourself harder, if you know that because calories are lower, you need to train a little harder, so you do so. If you stick to your diet a little bit better because you're actually technically cutting, then that's where I'm all for it. But I wouldn't suggest it as a strategy of just overall to get the most out of yourself. Can you discuss refeeds? Particularly, what are the pros and cons? When do I use them? Or when do you use them? So let's discuss what a refeed is. For those that aren't familiar with the strategy of a refeed would be typically when someone is in a caloric deficit and their calories are restricted, at set intervals we will do what's called a refeed day. This is a structured day of eating. It's not a cheat. It's not a, go out and eat whatever you want within a 2-hour period. This is a very specific set of macros, and it's used to elicit a specific response. So what I'll do is I will lower protein, probably to about the minimum. I will lower fats, keep them high enough to help with digestion, and then I will raise carbohydrates basically to slightly above where I feel like maintenance calories would be. And what this does is several things. It elicits an acute response hormonally, hopefully benefiting some sustained fat loss. It allows glycogen replenishment within the muscles. It'll pull more fluid into the muscles along with the carbohydrates, as carbohydrates are stored with water. So there is an added benefit of physical appearance change. There's an added benefit of some performance improvement, and hopefully there's a benefit of the hormonal response to keep fat loss going. There's some debate about that, but I have used Refeeds successfully with myself. I really enjoy them. So I use that strategy with just about all of my athletes who are cutting, unless there is a specific reason that they don't want to use a refeed. Some people don't like it. Some people find that they can't stop eating on a refeed day, or they use it as a day to cheat. So we use a different strategy. But that is the benefit that I see of the refeed. I also find that when I'm dieting, if I know in a few days that I have a higher carb day coming, and if I feel run down and I really feel like I need more carbs leading up to that, I can hold out until that refeed day comes. So for me, it's kind of a carrot in front of the horse. I can just use it as a psychological tool to keep myself on plan. I really enjoy the leaner I get, the frequency of the refeed changes, the size of the refeeds change, and it really allows my training to stay high level. It's very important that, when you're losing body fat, that you continue to train with intensity. So those are the reasons that I feel a refeed is important. What is the best book to read to get started on competing? Man, that's a good question. I'll have to be honest, there's not a lot of literature on competing specifically. There's probably some ebooks out now. But competing specifically, the first book that I ever read was called Arnold Schwarzenegger's Modern Bodybuilding Encyclopedia. That actually has a section on dieting, a section on posing, discusses all the training. So even, I think if I remember correctly, it discusses the tanning. Now remember, this is a dated book. It was written probably in the mid-70s. And I know they've done some updated editions. I loved that book because it was just my first introduction into the lifestyle. What really got me introduced very well, if you're interested in competing and you want some good knowledge on it, go on bodybuilding.com. Now it's a few years old now. I think this came out in 2007. There's a video series by Layne Norton called Life of a Natural Pro Bodybuilder. This video basically follows Layne Norton as he coaches Tommy Jeffers to competing for his natural pro card. It follows things, they discuss things like diet, like posing, like cardio, so many things that were kind of foreign to me at the time and really got me excited about competing. And it follows Tommy right up to the day of the show, literally backstage, shows what he's eating, how he's doing his tanning, how the judging works. It was just a fantastic introduction. The show was the OCB Midwest States, which I actually ended up doing like 2 years later. So it really inspired me, Tommy and Layne, and just the whole lifestyle. So I know you're looking for a book, but if you're really interested in competing, I really recommend it. It's Layne Norton's Life of a Natural Pro. They actually ended up doing like 3 seasons. They did another season with Chris Foz, who's actually a friend of mine now. They did another season with, I think it was Ben Wanzer and a female competitor. So there's just some, and Isabel even had a season on there. So there's just some really good video content. Bodybuilding.com did an amazing job back then, kind of helping make people aware of the natural bodybuilding community. Hopefully that helps you.